Hello everyone and welcome to my complete Dragon Age Inquisition review, a review that will have a lot of spoilers in it. So if you don't want spoilers, go check out my shorter and spoiler-free review. Link should be in the description and on an annotation on the screen. So let's begin. Now first off, on the background you'll see Dragon Age Inquisition multiplayer gameplay, which I will address towards the ending. But before that, I'm gonna go over good things and bad things basically of gameplay and story. I'm going to talk about pretty much all of it. So let's begin. First we're going to talk about gameplay. Now I have some bad things to say about the gameplay. Especially initially when I first started playing the game, there were some aspects that felt very weird, very strange. I had played the first two games relatively recently before I started this one, and there were some newly introduced issues with the gameplay and the mechanics that were very strange. I assume that's due to the complete change of engine from the first two games to the third, but still. And more specifically, I've made some videos, so you might have seen my complaints on that, but basically the game is lacking certain features, and that could make your experience slightly annoying, especially in the beginning until you get used to it. One such feature is the fact that you cannot right-click on an object and make your character go there and interact with it. For example, you will see a box which is a meter away from you, or 2 meters, and you would click on it and nothing will happen. You actually have to move physically to the box and then click on it. Your character will not go and loot the box like it would happen in Dragon Age 1 and 2. Same thing with attacking. You can't see a group of enemies and then right-click on one of them and send your character to attack. Now, these things, both of them, are possible through the tactical camera. And the tactical camera is good. However, I still have a problem with it. And the problem is that the tactical camera is almost entirely implemented to be used when you pause the game while you play. In other words, you have to pause, then activate tactical camera, and then use it. It's not suitable for use in a non-pausing type of gameplay. And that's how I like to play the game. Pretty much all the BioWare's games that have pausing, and others too, I don't like to pause. I like playing in real time. You know, previous games, KOTOR, Mass Effect, I tried to never pause. And I found the tactical camera pretty useless, and here's the reason why. It's because when you activate the tactical camera, you cannot bind it to your characters. When you use the WASD buttons in tactical camera, you actually just move the camera. It will not bind to your character's position. Also, it doesn't zoom out enough. They should have made it zoom out probably twice as much. It's very uncomfortable, and it has to be used during pausing. Another complaint is the scanning. When you scan, you cannot simply toggle the highlighting of objects on and off. Instead, you constantly have to scan an area around you to highlight objects. And many of the objects are pretty hard to notice unless you highlight them. Like sometimes they will be highlighted and you still wouldn't see them, which isn't bad. I mean, they blend with the environment very well, but there should have been an option for you to just highlight them and for you to have the ability to turn off and turn on that option. A minor fix to that is, and I recommend you doing it as soon as you can, to get the Inquisition perk. I believe it's, the perks are these things you get for influence on the war table, and you need to get it, I think it's from the Secrets tab, the perk that increases the range of your scanner. That kind of helps because you no longer have to spam it that much. You detect things from bigger range. Right, so next complaint is the fact that you cannot unbind the left mouse button from attacking. So every time you left click your mouse, your character that you selected will attack. So very often I would just randomly left click and then my character will start attacking, and it's annoying. Another complaint is that you cannot rotate your camera while your character is moving without your character following the direction of the camera. What that means is that you cannot click, say, W, start moving forward, and in the same time look to the left, turn your camera 90 degrees to the left without your character going in the same direction in which your camera is moving. It's possible to do that while you're standing, but not while you're moving, so that's another little issue that pops up. Okay, what else about the gameplay? The tab targeting is kind of weird very often, especially in the multiplayer, but in the single player as well. When you fight a lot of enemies, I would just spam tab and you will not target the right enemy. You know, I come from playing a lot of MMOs and I'm very used to tab targeting, and this game doesn't really do it properly. The mounts and the mounted movement, I've heard some people dislike the wind effect that shows up when you gallop. I don't really mind it, to be honest. But what I do mind about the mounts and the riding is that you cannot scan while you're on the mount. Well, I guess a follow-up complaint of that would be that you cannot loot while you're on the mount, which I guess makes sense, but I think you should have had the option for you to be able to scan, because you're constantly, like, if you need to gather stuff, it's very questionable whether you should use a mount or not. Because on one hand you need faster speed, on the other hand you need materials, and you're like, do I mount and risk missing a lot of stuff, herbs and ores and stuff, or do I go by foot? I'm doing this review without a list, so I might have to think about some things a little bit. Another negative thing about the gameplay that I can think of is that's not really a negative, that's more like a neutral remark, and it's the removal of healing and the addition of parry slash block slash dodge slash barrier mechanics, other ways to stay alive other than healing. That's okay, I guess. Initially I had some issues with it, but you will get to a point where, especially when you research your potions and you have the ability to carry more potions, you will be able to carry, say, 5 potions that recover your life, your health over time, and then 12 instant healing potions. So if you have enough herbs, it will pretty much be as if you have a healer, because you'll have plenty of healing. And when you get used to how to use your barriers and your blocking, it's not really I feel like it's a refreshing aspect, and it's working. Initially I had bad feelings about it, but overall I don't think it's a bad concept. Now another thing is the how should I call it, streamlining of the AI and that whole system where you add variables in different situations and what abilities should be used in which case. That's very simplified, and I feel like it would have been better if they kept it like it was in Dragon Age 1 and 2. Maybe something with the engine didn't allow them to do it properly, but the AI is a little more simplified, and while characters use their abilities somewhat intelligently, like for example Varric would do the backflip relatively when it's needed, but not always. For example, you would get into situations where the mage will use barrier as soon as you enter combat, and in many situations I was like, okay, how should I engage these enemies now? And then suddenly the mage casts barrier on the party, and I'm like, okay, charge before the barrier goes off. Another thing is that I felt like Cassandra wasn't using her whirlwind as an AoE. She would use it on single targets very often. I'm not completely sure about that, but I did notice it a few times. It felt like pretty much everyone, they were staying at full resources. Like they weren't utilizing their resources that well. For example, Cassandra would engage and then she would have full stamina, but she would not use abilities for a couple of seconds. Now, another gameplay negative, now that's strange. Usually the sound design of the game is pretty good. The abilities, the sounds that characters make are appropriate and are gratifying and everything. But there's this problem. When you have conversations out of cutscenes, and you would have those a lot, on one hand, the volume of the dialogue will be extremely low. By default, the audio settings are sound effects, dialogue, and music all at 100%. very early in the game, I think I set sound effects at 50, music at 70, and dialogue at 100, and still the dialogue was incredibly silent in some of those scenes. Maybe it was the positioning of the characters, and on the other hand, it would use the audio channels very strongly. I'm not sure how to explain that. Basically, if a character is slightly to the left of the screen, all of its sound will come from the left speaker, and it will create this weird stereo effect that is kind of needless in that situation. So that was, I don't know what's up with that. The best example was when I talked to Dagna. In Skyhold, she stands by the waterfall in the first conversation. And having sound effects at 50% and music and dialogue at 100, I barely heard what she was saying. Imagine if sound effects were at 100, it would be impossible. So yeah, I don't know what's up with that. And the last negative I can think of is the limitation of user interface. By the time I got towards the end of the game, the last 1/3 of the game, of my warrior, I had, I think, 13 or 14 abilities that I wanted to use, and yet I had only 10 action bars. Or I mean, not 10 action bars, but 10 slots on the action bar. So I don't know why they didn't let us have a bigger action bar. Like Dragon Age Origins, for example, had a huge one. Or at least they should have made a separate, perhaps smaller action bar on top of this one, only for the focus abilities. So we can put our 2 focus abilities over there. This is not that big of a complaint, but it's just kind of demoralizing to realize how you have many abilities that you want to use and the UI doesn't allow you to use it. And you can't even use it from the spellbook or whatever it's called. You know, you have to put them on your action bar to use them, and you cannot do that in combat. So there we go. And now let's move to the good things about the gameplay. My goodness, that review is going to be so long. The game looks very beautiful, and that enhances the gameplay very much. You would have these conversations that are not actually happening in cutscenes, and they will feel somewhat realistic and they will add to the immersion. The sound and the animations are pretty good, pretty gratifying. I played a warrior, a tank, and many abilities were just the way they sounded and the way the character was emoting, and it just felt very gratifying to fight and to charge and to do all these things, physics like break boxes and throw people around. The fighting felt epic when it wasn't annoying. If you were not facing one of these annoyances that I mentioned, it really felt good to be engaging in combat. A next major positive is, let's call it the exploration and the open worldness. In many areas, probably mostly the hinterlands, the game feels very much like an open world. Everything is very non-linear, and I like that. You would go somewhere to do a mission and you would get another mission on the way that would take you somewhere else, and you will find low levels and high level mobs in different areas which you have to avoid. You will find blocked pathways which then you have to order your advisors to help clear out in the war table, or you will just, many missions in general will have follow-up. Like, for example, the stable master in the hinterlands, he wanted watchtowers built, and I would go to these places and I would just mark the land. And I was like, oh well, I didn't build a watchtower, but at least it's something. And then when I went to the war table, there was a mission to send someone to oversee the building of watchtowers. And these little interactions create for a very high level of immersion when you play the game. You don't feel disconnected when you do the side stuff, when you explore, when you find new stuff, because they're, in some way, they enrich the entire picture. They don't feel literally like side content, like filler content or whatever you want to call it. It shows that the developers put time and effort, and they even, many of the side activities are voice acted. Like you will find a note that will bring up a codex entry that says something like someone died and whatever. And then one of your companions will make a remark on that. So they really wanted to create this world for you to explore and to get sucked into. I play Star Wars The Old Republic. Probably some of you who watch this review know. And even though it's an MMO, most of the time it does feel more linear than Dragon Age Inquisition. The progression, the path you follow when you complete missions, it's just very linear. You know where you go now, where to go next, where you're going to go after that. And here it's much more open, especially... I've heard some complaints actually about the hinterlands, having too many side missions and not important stuff. But I kind of liked it because it gave me this flashback of vanilla WoW and the Barrens. Actually, you only get it if you play Orc or Troll, but still. So if you play an Orc or a Troll in World of Warcraft, you start on Durtar, which is a pretty linear zone. You go from bottom to top until you reach Orgrimmar. And then you get, I think it was a mission that takes you to the crossroads in the Barrens, to the Flight Master. And then you take all the missions, and suddenly you have missions all over the Barrens. Back then, the northern and southern Barrens were one zone, so you would find yourself at very early levels in this huge zone to explore, with a lot of content, a lot of missions, and it gives this sense of wonder, which is very good, and I very much like it. I mentioned this in the short review. Even the more mundane stuff, like hunting for shards or whatever, will very often reveal more interesting content, like you will see a giant and a dragon fighting, or you will find a quarry or what's called a logging stand to upgrade your keep, not keep, but the Skyhold. And that's why if you play Dragon Age Inquisition, I do recommend going for a more complete walkthrough. Don't just go for the main story. It's not like it's not good, it's just you're gonna miss out on some of the more innovative elements of the franchise, and I think those are very good elements. I hope they continue to expand on that. For a moment there, I felt like I wished to play a Dragon Age Inquisition MMO. I know people will go crazy if they announce something like that, and it's not like I want to, it's just that I had a very good feeling of wonder and exploration when playing the game. Like I said, companions will talk. Companions would also have some specific missions, like around the world. For example, Cassandra would want to hunt Rogue Templars. Dorian would want you to kill these Venatori. Varric would want you to destroy Red Lyrium. Blackwall would want you to hunt for Grey Warden history. And you get conversations with your companions that all give little clues and hints as to why these people want these things, and then they'll gain your approval when you do them. And again, this gameplay and story integration theme, that I think it's very important. And I was very scared about that, because in the past few years, I remember it very well, this whole thing surrounding Mass Effect. I think it was with their writer, Jennifer Hepler, who suggested that just like there's a button to skip cutscenes, there should be a button that allows you to skip gameplay, like completely. And there was also an interview, I think, with the lead writer. What was his name? Casey Hudson, who, well, he didn't really say it very clearly, but he implied that Mass Effect, being a video game, somehow impaired his ability to tell a dramatic story or something. Like, he said something like, apparently he envisioned the story without a boss fight, but because it's a game, it should have a boss fight. So it's like, I don't know exactly, but basically there was this whole thing going of segregating gameplay and story, and I cannot stress enough how bad that is. The combination of gameplay and story is what makes story-driven games special. Otherwise, we would just watch movies. It is the main thing that creates this special, unique feeling of immersion while you play through the story. And gameplay and story should always complement each other. They should never be separated. And while I'm not necessarily saying that being able to just watch cutscenes and skip the gameplay is a terrible idea, but I'm saying that you should always try to tie in your gameplay and your story. And I think Dragon Age Inquisition fulfills that. What else is there? There's obviously the party banter, which again gives more insight on the characters while you're playing. I actually feel like I wanted the party banter to be more than it was. It felt more in Dragon Age 2, probably because you were constantly running throughout Kirkwall, and if there wasn't party banter, you would be bored as hell of going through the same street for the 100th time. But yeah, the War Table's a great addition. It's a place where you can find out a little bit about your advisors. It's kind of the non-story aspect where your advisors take place. And it's interesting how different advisors have different traits, and each one is better at doing certain War Table missions, and the others are better at other missions and so on. And then sometimes they would have little banters between each other as well during the War Table. Other than that, it also adds to the gameplay and story integration. I kind of mentioned that before briefly, that many of the missions you complete in a certain zone, you get follow-ups to that in the War Table, and you even get repeatable gathering resources type of missions. So if you don't really want to gather manually, you can use the advisors to bring you resources. A negative aspect of it is perhaps the extremely long missions. Like sometimes you'll get a mission that requires 24 hours to complete, which is, I mean, it does count hours when you're offline, obviously, but it's just, why so long? It will bring nice rewards, but still. And that was the other thing about the gameplay. I realized I didn't mention the dragon fights. They're okay. They're pretty challenging, especially if you play on the higher difficulties. So make sure you're geared and leveled up, and have some patience because you might wipe on these dragons. Okay, now let's talk about the meat of things, the story. Again, I'm gonna start with the negatives. They are not as much as in the gameplay section. I only really had one major problem with the story, and well, it was something that annoyed me a lot, but it was not that bad. You know, it's not at the scale of Mass Effect 3's ending, for example, not even close. But I'm going to get to that in a moment. In general, I think I mentioned that in my shorter review, but oh well. You'll have to hear it again because some people might not have watched that. But oh well, at least now I will include spoilers and talk a little more specifically about it. It's the fact that the events that are happening seem at times extremely convenient, so that the plot can continue and your story can continue and progress the way the devs wanted it to progress. The very premise of the Inquisitor and the Mark, the ability to seal rifts, it is safe to say that you got that ability out of luck, right? You lucked out, thanks to the Divine and Corypheus's incompetence, perhaps, in that one scene. So yeah, there is nothing special about you. You just luck out and gain this immense power to do this thing. Then, when you get stranded pretty much after Haven, you are lucky to have Solus, who leads you to Skyhold and lets the entire story progress in a new way. Then towards the end, the Temple of Mythal, you meet, you drink from the well. Mythal turns out to be Flemeth, or at least partially Flemeth, and she knows everything when it comes to moving the plot forward. Well, I think the fact that it was her kind of redeems that point, because back in Dragon Age 1 and Dragon Age 2, she also helped the heroes when they needed a lot of help. She also helped the heroes when they needed her help. And another aspect that redeems that whole convenient story is that the characters realize that it's just that the things that you're doing are basically impossible, and yet they're happening. Best examples are with Varric. Few times he's saying how he's thinking about writing a story, but he's sure no one's gonna believe it, so why writing it? I forgot to mention the section with the Fade. Again, how you happen to walk the Fade and survive and be relatively unscathed. In short, sometimes it feels like the events are arranged for your convenience, basically. And that's, I think, the only overall negative, if I can even call it a negative, about the story. I don't think there's anything else. Now I'm going to mention that specific thing that I didn't like, and I already made somewhat of a rant about it, a short video. It's the point where after you drink from the well, you go back to Skyhold, and apparently you heard voices in your head off screen that revealed the secret of Corypheus' power and how he should be stopped. And in the middle of a conversation, Morgan says, "What were you saying earlier?" And your character's like, "That dragon Corypheus has, he's not really an archdemon," and so on and so forth, and basically explain everything, how he has to be killed and Corypheus will lose his power. And I'm like, what? How did I know that? Where did this information just pop out from? And apparently the voices in my head told me so. I feel like it's a little better if you let Morrigan drink from the well, because then at least you still don't hear it, you still don't experience that whole situation, but in the end someone else is telling you this, so it feels a little better than having your own character saying it without you knowing it. This was the only part where I kind of lost the immersion and I was like, what the hell? Oh, and speaking of that, here's another thing, which it didn't really bother me much, it was kind of funny. In that scene where the voices tell me the secret of the dragon and Corypheus, both in the case of the main character drinking from the well and Morrigan drinking from the well, in the case of the main character delivers the line, in the case of Morrigan delivers the line, but the line clearly says that the dragon is not an archdemon. It's a dragon that has part of Corypheus' power inside of it, so on and so forth. But very clearly the line says, the dragon is not an archdemon. And then, after that, you get one scene with Cassandra, where she talks about the divine, and one scene with Morrigan after meeting Flemeth in the Altar of Mythal, or whatever that area is. Both Morrigan and Cassandra call it an archdemon. And it's even funnier if Morrigan delivered that line saying that it's not an archdemon, and half an hour later she refers to it as an archdemon. So I was like, okay, is it an archdemon or is it not an archdemon? Make up your mind. Oh, and yeah, let me think of something else about the story, something bad. Maybe I'll think of more things later. Oh yeah, here's another thing. Again, kind of connected to that situation. When you take the Illuvian from the Temple of Mythal and you teleport back to Skyhold, it is only you and your 3 companions that go through the Illuvian. When you get back to Skyhold, all of your companions are there and all of your advisors are also there. Then you start talking, you decide that you should go to summon Mythal somewhere. I actually forgot the location of the place where you summon Mythal, but it's not in Skyhold, it's somewhere else. So you travel there, you summon her, it turns out to be Flemeth, and you do things with her, you fight the dragon to subdue it, and then you go back to Skyhold, and you talk to your advisors again, and then the sky tears apart. Well, it's already torn, but the breach gets more intensive, and you realize Corypheus is at Haven, and he's trying to destroy the world or something. And Cullen says, oh my goodness, our army is not here. It's still traveling from the Arbor Wilds where the Temple of Mythal is. What are we going to do? And I'm like, well, how long does it take for this army to travel? I mean, you somehow traveled here instantaneously, and then I went to summon Mythal, I fought a dragon, I came back, and the army is still traveling? It's like a little too convenient again, because Corypheus had no army. And now the ending, I'm not sure if I should talk about the ending now. Okay, since I'm talking about negatives, let's mention something. It's kind of hard to determine what exactly is the ending. Some would say it's only the last mission where you fight Corypheus and his dragon. Some might consider the ending starting from when you access the Temple of Mythal. But basically the very final part where you fight Corypheus seems kind of lacking when it comes to content. It happens very fast, you just go there and you fight Corypheus and you kill him. I would have wished to have seen a more epic event. kind of like the Haven ending was. I'll talk more about that in the good part of the story. I wanted a sort of a Mass Effect 2 ending, perhaps, because again, I'll talk about that in the good part, but you get to know a lot of your companions very well, and there are a lot, like a big quantity of companions. And it would have been nice if you can do something with them. You can perhaps assign them to do tasks or to help something or someone, and that would have made for a more large-scale experience. Even if you had something like in Dragon Age Origins ending, where you split up and you defend the gates with whoever's left behind. You actually control them for a brief time. No, here it was very short, very straight to the point, which wasn't necessarily bad. I wouldn't say the game has a bad ending. I think it would have been better if it had a more grandiose ending, in a way, more not in terms of visuals. In terms of visuals it's satisfying, but in terms of involvement of characters and more things going on in the same time than just the main fight. As I'm starting to lose my voice after all this talking, but I'm going to try to get into the good part of the story. Now, I already mentioned the gameplay and story integration in the good parts of the gameplay, but since it's gameplay and story integration, I'm going to mention it here as well. And I can't stress on how well it's done here. If you compare it to a game such as, say, Mass Effect 3, it's 100 times better. The activities you do other than the main story are interesting, and they make sense, and they flesh out the entire setting better, and even the characters, because the characters, the companion characters, I mean, they have banters and they have voiced responses to side missions that you're doing, and it's just interesting. You feel more compelled to do these things. It's not like Mass Effect where you hear two characters talking. Sometimes you don't even see where exactly these two characters are, and you get some mission because you overheard something and then you have to go and click something on your galaxy map. No longer will you have these missions. Here it's much better, and I want to stress it out. So you have that. You've got epic moments. For example, the ending of the chapter 1, where you leave Haven, that has to be the best ending to a part of a game that's not the final part, like, ever. Does that make any sense? But yeah, it was the most epic conclusion to a portion of the game that's not actually the ending of the game that I've seen, I think. It felt amazing. I'm not going to go into incredible details of what's happening. You can watch my walkthrough for that, but it was extremely gratifying. The gameplay, the cutscenes, the dialogue, the music. So you have your memorable epic moments for sure. You have fun moments, like that goat, the guy that assaults Skyhold with a goat, because that's what their ways are. You have Cassandra being a secret fan of Varric's romance novels. You've got Sarah, the Iron Bull, that part in Orlais where you're striving to get the court's approval and they're calling you for the ball or something, and it's getting late, and I was like, oh my god, I'm going to lose approval. And I ended up late, and I actually got a positive approval for being fashionably late. Then what else? You have the rumors of how the Inquisitor, like, there are rumors of who the Inquisitor is romancing, and it's like half the characters basically, including Mother Giselle and Chancellor Roderick, and there's like 5 barons and 6 whatever. And then there was I didn't actually do it, but I saw a video of the Iron Bull's romance, and it's just, there are memorable moments, and that is something that the quality of a game and of experience in general can be measured very well with. After you've done with this game, how many things do you remember about it? And yeah, you'll remember a lot of things, I hope, if you decide to play the game, and I definitely recommend it. But I'm not done yet. Next point, and a very important point, is the characters, the companions. You have a huge amount of companions. With the advisors, I believe the count is 12. And despite of the large number of companions, and despite of my expectations, for some reason, when I watched the trailers and saw the companions on the website, I was like, these guys doesn't look very compelling to me. Like, there's this guy Dorian with the mustache, and this guy Cole with a pale face and a huge hat, and I suddenly imagined how they will be whiny and annoying, but instead, all of the companions, and by all I mean all of them, they were good. Everyone had interesting aspects about them. They were not, perfect. They had their issues, their good sides and bad sides. The game made me care about all of them, and I wanted to talk to them the first chance I get. After every mission, I walked around Skyhold or around Haven to talk to them, see if they have something new to say. They had their accent, their pattern of speech, their word usage. BioWare outdid themselves when creating the characters, really, especially, again, coming from Dragon Age 2, Dragon Age Inquisition is a huge improvement. What else? Should I talk about the romances? I did Cassandra's romance, and through loading a save, I also did Josephine's, and then I watched a few on YouTube, and they seem pretty good. They are, they don't lack content and substance. Honestly, I felt like I want even more of the romance with Cassandra because it was going very well. It's unique in its own way. Yeah, it was very interesting to see where this story will go. I wonder, should I talk about the nakedness in the scenes, the love scenes? I can't help but feel slightly awkward about it, because the game as a whole doesn't really give you that vibe. The game doesn't have generally content that will be considered disturbing or overly sexualized. Like, you have the female characters are very moderate, like they don't have insanely huge breasts and so on. Pretty much none of the characters is extremely sexualized. None of your companions or any other prominent female character goes around half naked. And then you get to the romance scene and it's like boobies on screen. I felt a little awkward, honestly, but it was well done. I don't complain, so yeah, moving on. Now, I'm not sure if I should talk about specific parts of the story, like I don't want to spoil that much, considering that someone might be watching this thing before playing the game. I'm glad, let's put it this way, I'm glad to see what they did with Flemeth. And I'm not talking about the post-credit scene, I'm talking about her involvement as Mythal and all that. I think that matches her. About the post-credit scenes, I kind of like and dislike what they did with Solus, because he was my favorite mage. He was my favorite mage companion and the best geared. And then he, Also, a fun thing that a viewer mentioned, I couldn't realize that, but they did. When you do the mission where you help Solus's spirit friend, the name of the mission, the quest, is actually an anagram for Fen'Harel Dread Wolf, or Fen'Harel the Dread Wolf, one of the two. If you rearrange the letters, you get that, which is a very cute clue, but yeah. I never expected that from Solus, really. I mean, I thought some of his knowledge comes from his extensive journeys through the Fate, but wow. So yeah, there is a slight twist in the ending, or a surprise, I guess, which got me very interested. I don't know, is there anything else? There are probably other things that I'm summarizing the good parts very much, but that means that overall I have positive experience with the game. I'm looking forward to my next playthrough, and I'm very much looking forward to see where they go from here. If you ask me, I would prefer if they went straight up for either a substantial expansion or just Dragon Age 4. Because I want the same experience or better. Like, I don't want short DLCs. I don't want to go for one mission. I want more missions and more exploration and more areas. I want more of the same large-scale content. I don't want tiny bits, really. So I hope that they go for a substantial expansion or for a completely new game. What I liked about the epilogue, that I guess also counts as a good part of the story, is that you don't get companion epilogues. It's good because I feel like their story will be continued starting at a very, not so distant point in the future, and that's why they avoided having epilogues for them, because, basically what happens next with them will be revealed in the next expansion or the next game. And I'm interested to see that, and I was kind of hoping for that. I didn't want to see something like, oh, Sarah went back to Orlais and became this and that. No, I want to see what happens. I want to be there. So I feel like that's what we're going to get. I hope so. And overall, I'm surprised. I expected less from Dragon Age Inquisition. I felt like it's going to be more like Dragon Age 2, but it turned out to be more like Dragon Age Origins. Now, I've said a few times that Dragon Age Origins is my favorite RPG, and is this game better or worse? I have a hard time answering this question. The game definitely supersedes Dragon Age Origins in certain aspects. The exploration, the open worldness is a pretty major aspect. If you compare the story, I probably will have to say that Dragon Age Origins has it better. But the thing is that Dragon Age Origins was a more confined story. It was more of a standalone. It happens somewhat in a vacuum, and the follow-up happens much later. Arguably, Dragon Age 2 happens in the vacuum as well, pretty much in the vacuum of Kirkwall. And then Dragon Age Inquisition, where a bigger portion of the world is involved, happens so much later. And so the events of Origins are not that important, and Origins can be considered, for all intents and purposes, a separate thing. So it had the chance to have a more gratifying and satisfying conclusion. Here, I'm looking forward to what comes next, and I will probably have to rate the story after I see what happens next in comparison to Origins. If I have to say it now, I'll probably say the Origins story was slightly better, like it offered a lot of options, more so than this one. Maybe it was because of the fact that you had no voice acting and you could have a lot of role playing with yourself, with what your character is saying and how it feels like. You have many ways of dealing with a certain situation. Best example is probably the Tower of Magi. Not the Tower of Magi, but the Redcliffe, Castle Redcliffe, where you could deal with Connor's possession in 100 different ways. In Inquisition, they didn't go so far, but they do have benefits on their own. Like, they have more companions than Origins. And they went for... How shall I explain that? The characters in Inquisition feel more mature than the characters in Origins. And I feel like that's harder to develop on BioWare's side, but it's very interesting when it's executed properly, and especially in contrast. After playing Origins, what I mean by that is that most of the characters tend to be older, and not simply older, but more experienced, more well-versed in whatever it is that they're doing. Let's compare the first characters in both games. You have, well, other than the main character, you have Alistair, Morrigan, and Liliana being your very first companions in Origins, the companions that stay with you the most, and arguably the most prominent ones, the ones that take up the most of the story and seem to be the most significant overall. I think something similar can be said here. in Dragon Age Inquisition with Cassandra, Varric, and Solus. If you compare the 3 from Origins to the 3 of Inquisition, you see how those in Origins, they're very young, they are inexperienced, they don't really have their place in life. Well, you know, let's take Alistair. Alistair he was raised initially in the castle, then he joined the Templars, then he didn't really complete the Templar training and joined the Wardens. He got very close to Duncan, then Duncan died, and he became a Grey Warden, but as we see, he barely knew the first thing about being a Grey Warden. So he's very, you know, he's never really had a girlfriend, I think. He's not very experienced in anything. And he's young, and that feeling comes across. It is also very obvious the fact that you can harden him and Liliana, or decide to not to harden them. You can shape their personality, and it makes sense. Liliana is a little more experienced, I agree, but she's had pretty much a personality reset from what happened to Orlais and going to the Chantry, and then what happened to the Chantry and joining the Grey Wardens. She's very kind of childish in a way. She loves stories, and she likes to tell stories, and she likes little cute animals, and she dreams of love, like the love in Legends, and you know, stuff like that. More girly stuff, if you will. And then you have Morrigan, who also tries to be very smart and very sarcastic and all that, which are usually traits of maturity, but she has very little experience in the world outside of the wilds. She wonders why people shake hands, and she doesn't really know much about love or friendship. So you see where I'm going. And if you have a look at Cassandra, Varric, and Solus, they're all pretty well versed into whatever it is they're doing, and they're much older, they have a lot of experience, they've seen a lot, they've been through a lot, and it makes for an interesting change of the, I don't know of what, you know what I mean. So they managed to pull that off properly. There is more to be wanted, of course, always, and I hope they achieve even more. I see Inquisition as this amazing potential for something even better, even more epic, as BioWare's promise that they can still pull off something great, something grand, that they didn't lost their way in Dragon Age 2 and Mass Effect 3. And I was pretty convinced that they did, but now hope is back, and there is potential for a huge resurgence of BioWare fanboys, and also a huge potential for even a more disastrous fall than what we saw in Dragon Age 2 or Mass Effect 3. As my voice is completely dying, so I think I'm gonna wrap this up. Oh, hold on, I have to talk about the multiplayer. Yeah, of course. So let's talk briefly about the multiplayer. The multiplayer is Mass Effect 3 Multiplayer 2.0, basically. Other than the fact that it's not a shooter, but it's a dungeon crawler, very similar to the gameplay of the story mode, like the campaign. The only difference is that you play only one character, and you play with 3 others. There are multiple classes, there are 3 main roles, rogue, mage, and warrior. There is tanking, there is some resemblance of healing with the barriers, and overall, if you really dislike the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, Dragon Age Inquisition multiplayer may not be for you, but if you're okay with Mass Effect 3's multiplayer, then you'll probably like this one. This one feels less annoying than the Mass Effect 3 one, in the sense that there is crafting. Now, it's not very easy to get enough materials to craft stuff, but crafting allows you to unlock characters and to get some gear for them without having to count solely on the random number generation. No longer will you get into a situation where you really want to have this specific character, and then you have to unlock half the weapons and all other characters, if you're unlucky, to get the one you want. Here, if you play a certain amount of time, you will gather enough materials to unlock whichever character you want. So the crafting really adds a little, gives you a little break from the constant RNG. And also you have the fact that all weapons are mostly the same, other than the way they look. You know, in Mass Effect 3, you have a ton of shotguns and maybe you only want 1 or 2 of them and you hate the rest, and the only weapons you get are the rest. Here, whether it's a sword or an axe, it's largely the same. So it feels a little more gratifying. The sense of reward is a little bigger, and the sense of control on what you're getting and what you're playing with a little better. So ultimately, I like the multiplayer. It's not, you know, super amazing, but it does the job, and I play it here and there, and it's enjoyable. It feels more tactical too, so I think there's more room for strategy, definitely, than there is in Mass Effect. So I think that wraps it up. Thank you very much for sticking with me throughout this very long review. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think. Share it if you feel like it's good and people will benefit from it. You can check my complete walkthrough. You can check the one I'm going to start very soon too. If you're watching this video in the future, I've probably already have 2, so there we go. Thank you for watching, and until next video, stay tuned and be good.